Hi, it's Helena Wadia, and welcome back to the Standard Podcast. Coming up, why the threat of nuclear weapons has made the hope for peace between Ukraine and Russia more complex than ever before for Britain.
The potential enemy, the antagonist, is more complex and dangerous than has been faced in almost every peacekeeping operation hitherto.
We'll be joined by Robert Fox, defence editor of the London Standard. But first, talks today in Saudi Arabia saw the US and Russia discussing a peace deal to end Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine. The meeting was the first face-to-face discussions between the two countries since the war began in 2022. But who was involved in the talks? What were the aims? And what can we expect going forward? Joining me now is Nicholas Cecil, political editor of the London Standard. Hi, Nicholas.
Hello.
So the US and Russia are holding talks in Saudi Arabia to discuss a peace deal to end Putin's invasion of Ukraine. How did this come about?
Well, this came about after a conversation between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. And what is striking about these peace talks is that the country that is not present is Ukraine, the country that was invaded by Vladimir Putin in February 2022. So this is clearly a major omission. Its president, Vladimir Zelensky, has made clear that nothing that comes out of this meeting will be accepted by Ukraine, certainly or on face value initially. While he can say that, at the end of the day, a significant part of Ukraine's war effort is being funded by America. So actually, Donald Trump holds a lot of the key cards here. So he is acting very much in his own interest, in America's interest. It's not quite clear yet whether he really has got Ukraine's interests at heart here.
What then are the aims of the talks?
Well, the talks are very initial talks. Washington is stressing that they're not actually dividing up territory or anything like that at this stage, or so we are led to believe. Having said that, the US Defense Secretary, he caused a lot of controversy recently, a guy called Pete Hegsworth, by effectively handing annexed Crimea to Russia, but before the talks had even started. So there was a lot of anger in European capitals about that. Trump very much likes dealing with strong men. He likes striking deals with people. And there are growing warnings that the way he is going about this could actually be detrimental, that you might get a peace deal, which might be in the interest of Trump and America, but that it wouldn't be a long-lasting peace deal, and that this could actually lead to a wider war. And so Putin may take the chance to regroup his army, his troops, rebuild them, and then just launch a new attack on Ukraine in 6 months' time. And this may not be kind of a clear-cut attack. It could be a kind of a grey warfare attack where they support, or they say they're supporting some local people who want to break away from Ukraine. So there are lots and lots of questions still need to be answered about the way Trump is dealing with these peace talks, which is a very unusual way.
As you mentioned, neither Ukraine nor any European countries were invited to the talks. Have European leaders met elsewhere, and what are their fears?
Yes, so they had a crisis emergency meeting in Paris called by the French President Emmanuel Macron. What they tried to do, they tried to put on a show of unity, but actually they didn't do a very good job at that. There were a number of divisions. For example, Britain, Sir Keir Starmer pledged that the UK would commit peacekeeping troops to Ukraine if the war ends to deter a future attack by Putin's army. Germany, while initially sounding positive about such a step, its Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, later came out and said it was all premature and people shouldn't be talking about it now. So Europe is in quite a lot of disarray on the issue at the moment. And what it often boils down to, and certainly in this case, is money. And for many, many years, many European countries have not committed a lot of funding to their defense, to their armies, their air forces, their navies. So at the moment, there are very few military powers in Europe. There's Britain, there's France, and some other countries do have some capabilities, but nowhere near enough to deal with Russian aggression.
You mentioned there that Sir Keir Starmer pledged to send peacekeeping forces to Ukraine if Putin's war ends. This is a clear-cut commitment from Starmer, but would it be solely his decision?
Yes, so if the government wanted to commit troops to a peacekeeping mission in Ukraine, there would almost certainly be a vote in Parliament. Transport Secretary Heidi Alexander was on the media round for the government this morning, and she did give a categoric pledge that this would happen, but she said that is what would normally happen. Um, and given that it'd be such a significant step, I think it'd be very unlikely not to happen. The other thing with Keir Starmer is he very much respects the rule of law and institutions and protocols. So I think that's another reason why it's likely that there would be a vote in Parliament.
As we're recording, the talks have been going on for a couple of hours. Is it hard to know what to expect from these talks?
I think so. And also, these talks are partly about Ukraine, but they are also, to a significant degree, about ties between the US and Russia. So basically, what Putin and Trump, to some extent, are trying to do is to use this to do a bigger reset of relations between Washington and Moscow. And again, this is two strong men who want to show that they are powerful and that they can strike deals. The big question is that if they both gain, will the loser be Ukraine and Europe?
The first round of talks between the US and Russian officials in Saudi Arabia finished after 4.5 hours. Kremlin aide Yuri Ushakov said the negotiations went well, with conditions for a meeting between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin being discussed, but with no date agreed. Let's go to the ads. In part 2, we'll be joined by Robert Fox, defence editor of the London Standard, to explain more about why this may be the most complex peace operation of modern times. We'll see you back here in just a moment. Welcome back. More on Russia and Ukraine now, and a dramatic change in US policy has prompted the government to hold emergency meetings on defense spending. Donald Trump has said the US no longer sees the defense of Europe as its primary concern, and called for Europe to spend more on helping Ukraine in the war with Russia, while the US should spend less. The UK's Defence Secretary John Healey said today that Labour needs to rearm Britain with more muscular defence and promised to reform the armed forces. However, as the London Standard's defence editor explains, it's not just the army involved on the front line. Here's Rachelle Abbott speaking to Robert Fox.
Robert, could you explain why this is the most complex peace operation of modern times?
The potential enemy, the antagonist, is more complex and dangerous than has been faced in almost every peacekeeping operation hitherto, with the possible exception of what goes on the demarcation lines between Pakistan and India. What's the common factor? Russia, India, Pakistan, Britain, France, they're nuclear powers. Never before, whether it's Bosnia, even Iraq, even Afghanistan, what lay around it, we were not up against a nuclear-armed power. Moreover, a power in the shape of Putin's Russia, which threatens to use nuclear weapons.
Can Britain really do it?
Yes, I think that they're used to doing it, but what they're up against, the government and the armed forces, is the kind of narrative that's been put out in the media. I'm not blaming the British media or indicating them, but in the general media. I mean, the kind of vague nonsense that you get from American media. Oh, Britain isn't up to it. It's hollowed out. It's absolutely embarrassing. The army is in a state of reform. It's in a state of disrepair, but it's not primarily going to be the army that will be involved on the front line. We could offer up to 5,000 or 6,000 troops in a peacekeeping brigade, and we're well capable of doing it, and we are experienced at this. But it's what else goes in the Lego building structure of this peace force that's going to be terribly interesting. It will be European-led, therefore it will be led by a coalition, probably with a French commander and a British deputy commander and providing a lot of the command structure. And I think that's pretty well agreed already, given what was expected, but they didn't really want, of this shilly-shallying political embarrassment and inward-lookingness of the Germans. But it looks as if a party is getting together, and it's going to be very interesting because when it comes down to it, actually, the Americans and Trumpland won't be totally dominant. By the way, that old fox, Volodymyr Zelensky, has spotted this.
Is this really mission impossible, Robert?
Probably not, because the sands are shifting very, very rapidly, if you could use that metaphor, in Westminster, because we're coming up for a defence review. And Rachelle from Accounts, as she's known, as the Chancellor is known universally now, has been saying, no, and we can't do it because we need all the extra slack we have in money to go to the National Health and the Welfare Services, which will now command something quite over half of the entire public expenditure of the British Exchequer and state. People are now saying it's not good enough.
And what about the UK Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer?
Starmer seems to have changed in the past 10 days over this. He senses a very real and present danger in Ukraine from Russia, which threatens directly the UK. We have heard from the Norwegians and allies, and even neutral allies, that our infrastructure is under threat from Russia. We have had surveillance, we've had subversion, and of course we've had numerous copious cyber attacks, and we've got to get real about this. And that's why I think there will be an uplift in defence expenditure, but not so much in conventional defence expenditure. It's in the areas like cyber, like AI, which are absolutely vital. But I think there's been a wind of change in Whitehall in the past 2 or 3 weeks. Starmer, it seemed to me, and from listening and watching John Healey today, is decided he does want to be behind this peace effort in Eastern Europe, because I think, interestingly, the appearance of the likes of Pete Hegseth, the defense minister, defense secretary of the US, and J.D. Vance, just insulting their allies, their European allies, has actually put a bit of lead in the pencil. And I think that Starmer, like Macron, the Dutch, the Danish, and the Baltic leaders, they're not going to take this at all. If you're going to say that Europe's useless, they're going to step up to the plate. And I think they're all prepared to do that bit more, not huge amounts, but it will be a dramatic difference to try and secure peace in Eastern Europe, because it's a peace right across the continent. Very interesting, after all the chat from the last government about tilts to the Pacific and we should be involved in that. Britain is a North Atlantic European power, and I think this has really come home.
Who are the key figures implementing these new strategies?
One of the key figures in implementing this new outlook will be the National Security Advisor, very experienced from Tony Blair's day, Jonathan Powell. Jonathan Powell was at the right hand of the Prime Minister when he went for the emergency summit yesterday at the Elysee Palace, and he will be guiding the defence reform coming through the defence review, and will be working with the chiefs and the defence secretary. It's interesting that it's going to be Jonathan Powell and not David Lammy that will be putting together the diplomacy behind this peace effort. But the fact is that particularly today, absolutely today, Tuesday the 18th, it has been made absolutely clear to me that this government is really serious about this.
And that's The Standard. For all the latest news and to read more about the stories featured in this episode, head to standard.co.uk. If you'd like to get in touch with us, we'd love to hear from you. Drop us a line at podcasts@standard.co.uk.